The dead man whispered Marcus Thompson 3 times before Marcus realized the voice was coming from beneath the white sheet on table 7. His flashlight beam trembled as it swept across the morgue's cold tile floor, past the stainless steel gurneys, stopping at the covered form that shouldn't have been capable of speech. Marcus had been a paramedic for 16 years. He had seen death in every variation. Car accidents, heart attacks, drownings, suicides. He knew what dead looked like, sounded like, felt like. Dead didn't whisper your name in the darkness of a hospital basement at 4:32 in the morning. Marcus had come down here looking for his missing equipment bag. Someone had accidentally wheeled it away during the chaos of an emergency call 3 hours earlier. He needed it back before his shift ended at 6. The morgue was the last place he wanted to search, but protocol required checking every department before filing a lost property report. He had permission from the night security guard. He had legitimate reasons to be here. But standing alone among the deceased with his name floating through stale air, Marcus felt like an intruder in a space that didn't welcome the living. The voice came again. Clearer this time, more insistent. Marcus Thompson. Not a question, a statement. Recognition. Familiarity, like someone greeting an old friend they hadn't seen in years. Marcus approached table 7 with steps that felt disconnected from his conscious decision to move forward. Professional curiosity battled with primal instinct. Every cell in his body screamed to leave this room, to abandon his missing bag, to forget he had ever heard his name spoken by something that medical science said was impossible. His hand reached for the sheet corner. Training overrode fear. 16 years of facing the inexplicable in emergency situations had taught Marcus that most mysteries had rational explanations once you examined them closely. Maybe a phone was playing a recording. Maybe someone was pulling a cruel prank. Maybe exhaustion had finally caught up with him, and his mind was manufacturing sounds from the ambient noise of hospital infrastructure. He pulled back the sheet. The face beneath was unfamiliar. Male, mid-50s, gray hair, weathered skin, eyes closed, lips slightly parted. Everything about the body indicated recent death. Rigor mortis beginning to set in. Skin temperature cool but not yet cold. Toe tag reading David Brennan. Time of death listed as 11:47 p.m. Cause listed as cardiac arrest. Natural, expected, unremarkable. Marcus had never seen this man before in his life, had never responded to a call at his address, had never transported him to any hospital emergency room. Yet somehow David Brennan knew Marcus Thompson's name. Somehow David Brennan had been waiting for Marcus to find him in this basement morgue. Somehow David Brennan had one final message to deliver before whatever connection existed between consciousness and flesh dissolved completely. Marcus stood frozen with the sheet bunched in his hand, staring down at the dead man's face, trying to understand what was happening. The rational part of his brain insisted this was impossible. The deeper part, the part that kept him alive during 16 years of emergency calls where split-second instincts mattered more than protocols, whispered something different. This man knows you. This man has been looking for you. This man died for the specific purpose of bringing you to this moment. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The refrigeration units clicked and whirred. Somewhere above them, St. Catherine's Hospital continued its endless cycle of healing and dying, living and ending, hope and grief. But down here in the morgue's artificial twilight, time felt suspended. Marcus became aware of how completely alone he was. The security guard wouldn't check on him. The night staff had no reason to come down here until morning. If something happened, if Marcus needed help, if the situation became dangerous, no one would hear him scream. David Brennan's lips moved, just slightly. Just enough for Marcus to see the shape forming even though no breath emerged, no sound accompanied the gesture. Help her. 2 words mouthed by a corpse that shouldn't have been capable of movement, let alone communication. Help her. Marcus stumbled backward, dropping the sheet, reaching for his radio before remembering he had left it in his ambulance. His phone. He needed his phone. He needed to call someone, document this, get witnesses, prove he wasn't experiencing some kind of mental break. But even as his hand fumbled for his pocket, Marcus knew no one would believe him. Dead bodies didn't speak. Dead bodies didn't move. Dead bodies didn't recognize paramedics they had never met and deliver cryptic messages about helping unnamed women. This was impossible according to every medical textbook, every scientific study, every rational explanation for how biology functioned. Yet Marcus had seen it. Marcus had heard it. Marcus now carried knowledge that would haunt him, unless he understood what David Brennan wanted. Who needed help? Why had David chosen Marcus? And what connected them across the barrier between life and death? Stay here. Because the answer was about to shatter everything Marcus believed about the boundaries between the living and the dead. Marcus didn't leave the morgue. Against every instinct screaming at him to run, to escape, to pretend this night had never happened, he stayed. He pulled a metal stool close to table 7 and sat down facing David Brennan's covered form. The sheet had fallen back over the body when Marcus stumbled away, creating a barrier of white cotton between them. But Marcus could still see the outline beneath, still sense the presence of something that refused to fully depart despite medical documentation declaring it gone. He pulled out his phone and searched the name, David Brennan. Dozens of results appeared. Different cities, different ages, different lives. Marcus added St. Catherine's Hospital to the search terms. Nothing relevant. He tried obituaries, local news, social media profiles. The David Brennan on table 7 remained a ghost in more ways than one. No digital footprint, no public history, no connections Marcus could trace. Just a name, a death certificate, and an impossible message whispered in a basement morgue. Marcus checked the toe tag again. Address listed was 1847 Ashwood Drive. He knew that neighborhood, working class, older homes, quiet streets where people kept to themselves, and emergencies were rare. Marcus tried to remember if he had ever responded to a call on Ashwood Drive. 16 years of emergency responses blurred together, thousands of addresses, thousands of faces, thousands of moments where life and death balanced on the decisions he made in seconds. Maybe he had been there. Maybe he had treated someone. Maybe David Brennan had been watching from a window, memorizing Marcus's name from the uniform badge, waiting for the right moment to make contact. But that didn't explain why. It didn't explain how a dead man could speak. It didn't explain the desperate urgency in those two-mouthed words. Help her. Who was she? Wife? Daughter? Sister? Someone David loved enough that even death couldn't silence his need to protect her. Someone in danger. Someone only Marcus could save for reasons that remained hidden beneath layers of mystery. Marcus was only beginning to peel back. The morgue phone rang. Marcus jumped, his stool scraping against the tile floor with a sound that echoed off the walls. He stared at the old desk phone mounted near the door. It rang 3 times before he stood and crossed the room to answer it. Hospital operators didn't usually call the morgue during night shifts. The dead had no appointments to keep, no urgent messages to receive, no reason for communication. Marcus lifted the receiver. Static hissed through the line. Then a voice. Female, young, terrified. She spoke his name the same way David Brennan had, Marcus Thompson. Not a question, a statement of recognition. A confirmation that she had found the right person. The voice continued before Marcus could respond. My father sent you. You need to come to Ashwood Drive. You need to come now. Please. Before it's too late, before he finds me. Before everything my father died trying to prevent happens anyway. The line went dead. Marcus stood holding the receiver, listening to the dial tone, feeling reality fracture around him. David Brennan had a daughter. David Brennan had died trying to protect her from something. David Brennan had somehow reached across death to contact the one person who could finish what he started. But Marcus didn't understand his role in this, didn't understand why he had been chosen, didn't understand what threat required a dead man's intervention to stop. He returned to table 7. He pulled back the sheet one more time. David Brennan's face was peaceful now. Whatever urgent message had animated his lips was gone. Whatever connection had bridged the gap between consciousness and corpse had severed. Marcus was alone again with nothing but questions, and a growing certainty that his shift wouldn't end at 6 a.m., that his missing equipment bag was the least important thing he had lost tonight, that David Brennan had set events in motion that would force Marcus to confront truths about death he had spent 16 years avoiding. Marcus took a photo of David's face. Documentation. Evidence. Proof that this man existed. Then he covered him again and left the morgue. The hospital corridors were empty except for distant sounds of monitors beeping and nurses making rounds. Marcus walked to his ambulance in the parking garage. His partner James had gone home 2 hours ago after their last call. Marcus was supposed to finish paperwork and check out. Instead, he started the engine and drove toward Ashwood Drive. The streets were dark at 5:15 in the morning. Streetlights cast orange pools across wet pavement. October rain had started again, turning the windshield into a blur of reflected lights and shadows. Marcus drove with his hands tight on the wheel, his mind racing through scenarios. What would he find at 1847 Ashwood Drive? What danger was David's daughter facing? And why did Marcus feel like he was driving towards something he had been avoiding his entire career? Some truth about the work he did, about the lives he saved, and the deaths he witnessed, about the thin membranes separating emergency response from something darker. He turned onto Ashwood Drive. The houses sat quiet and dark. Working people sleeping before early shifts. Families dreaming in rooms that smelled of coffee and laundry detergent. Normal life proceeding while Marcus searched for an address that would explain why a dead man had chosen him. Why a terrified daughter had called the morgue phone knowing exactly who would answer. Why this night felt like the culmination of 16 years of questions Marcus had never allowed himself to ask. Number 1847 appeared on his right. A small house, single story, modest. The kind of place where people lived entire lives without attracting attention. Marcus parked at the curb. No lights visible through the windows. No movement. No indication anyone was home or in danger, or waiting for the paramedic a dead father had summoned. Marcus sat in his ambulance with the engine running and the rain drumming on the roof, and a choice spreading before him like a chasm he couldn't see the bottom of. Marcus cut the engine and stepped out into the rain. Water soaked through his uniform within seconds, cold against his skin, grounding him in physical sensation when his mind threatened to spiral into territory he couldn't rationalize. He approached the front door of 1847 Ashwood Drive with the same measured calm he used approaching accident scenes. Assess, observe, don't rush, don't assume. Let the situation reveal itself before taking action. The door was unlocked. It swung open under his light push, revealing darkness beyond the threshold. Marcus called out, identified himself as a paramedic, said he was responding to a call for help. No answer came from inside, just silence broken by the sound of rain hitting the roof and water dripping from gutters. Marcus pulled his flashlight and entered. The house felt empty in the way places feel when death has recently occurred. Not abandoned, not waiting for occupants to return, but hollowed out, stripped of the invisible presence that makes a house feel lived in. Marcus swept his light across a modest living room. Furniture worn but clean. Photos on the mantel showing a younger David Brennan with a little girl. The girl aging through the pictures. School photos. Graduation. A young woman in her 20s smiling beside her father. Just the two of them in every frame. No mother, no other family. Just David and his daughter against whatever the world threw at them. Marcus moved deeper into the house. The kitchen was tidy. Dishes drying in the rack. A single coffee cup on the counter. A calendar on the wall with David's handwriting marking appointments and reminders. October circled with red marker. Multiple dates crossed out. Leading to yesterday, October 16th, the day David Brennan died. The day he circled weeks in advance like he knew exactly when his time would end. A sound came from the back of the house. Soft, rhythmic, like someone crying with their face buried in a pillow to muffle the noise. Marcus followed it down a narrow hallway. 3 doors, 2 open bedrooms, 1 closed door at the end. The crying came from behind that closed door. Marcus knocked, announced himself again, asked if someone needed help. The crying stopped immediately. The door opened. A young woman stood in the frame, mid-20s, dark hair, red eyes from weeping. She looked exactly like the graduation photo on the mantle, but older now. Worn down by grief and something else Marcus couldn't identify. Fear. Deep existential terror that had nothing to do with her father's recent death, and everything to do with why he died, circling October 16th on a kitchen calendar. She said her name was Claire Brennan. She said Marcus needed to understand something before she explained why her father sent him. She said what she was about to tell him would sound impossible, but every word was true, and Marcus's life depended on believing her. Because the thing that killed David Brennan was still in this house. Still hunting. Still hungry for the life David had sacrificed himself to protect. Marcus felt the temperature drop, not gradually, instantly, like someone had opened a freezer door in the middle of the hallway. His breath became visible in the flashlight beam. Claire stepped back into her room, pulling Marcus inside, closing the door with shaking hands. She locked it. Then she turned to face him with eyes that held the kind of knowledge people weren't meant to carry. The kind that rewrote everything you thought you understood about reality. Her father had been a paramedic too. 23 years with the city emergency services. He had responded to a call 16 years ago at this exact address when the previous owner died alone in the living room. Heart attack. Quick. Painless. Except David had been the first responder, and in those moments between finding the body and calling it in, something had happened. The dead man had whispered David's name, had delivered a warning, had told David that responding to that call had marked him, that from that moment forward, David would carry death's attention, that 16 years later, on October 16th, death would return to collect what it was owed. David had thought it was trauma, PTSD, the stress of seeing too many bodies, too many final moments, too many lives ended on gurneys and living room floors. He had gone to therapy, taken medication, tried to rationalize the warning as his mind's way of processing grief. But the whispers continued. In quiet moments, in empty rooms, in the space between sleeping and waking. Death reminding David of the deal he didn't know he had made by being present at that moment 16 years ago. Claire had grown up watching her father battle invisible forces, watching him circle October 16th every year with increasing dread, watching him prepare for an ending he couldn't prevent but refused to face passively. So David had researched, had found other first responders who reported similar experiences, had discovered a pattern. Death sometimes marked the living who interfered at precise moments when the barrier between worlds was thin. And those marked people had one option: transfer the mark to someone else, pass the attention to another responder, another person who worked the edges between life and death, someone who would be present at the right moment to accept the exchange. David had chosen Marcus Thompson, had researched his shifts, his routes, his response times, had timed his own death to occur at exactly 11:47 p.m., so his body would arrive at St. Catherine's morgue during Marcus's shift. Had arranged every detail to ensure Marcus would be the one to find him, the one to hear his name, the one to receive the message that would bring him to this house where Claire waited with the terrible truth. Marcus started to speak, to protest, to demand rational explanations. But Claire grabbed his arm with desperate strength. She pointed to the bedroom window, to the reflection in the rain-streaked glass. Marcus saw himself, saw Claire, and behind them, barely visible, a third figure. Tall, indistinct, made of shadows that didn't match any light source. Watching them with attention that felt ancient and patient and absolutely certain of its claim. David Brennan had died trying to save his daughter by marking Marcus instead. But something had gone wrong. The transfer wasn't complete. Death had followed David to the morgue, had used his corpse to speak, had tracked Marcus to this house where it waited to collect everyone involved. Claire and Marcus were trapped in a bedroom with a locked door that wouldn't stop what stood behind them in the reflection. And Marcus finally understood why 16 years of emergency calls had felt like preparation. Why he had been drawn to this work. Why death had always felt like more than biology to him. Marcus turned from the window reflection to face Claire directly. His 16 years of emergency training created a framework for crisis response that his mind clung to desperately. Assess the situation, identify the threat, create an exit strategy. But none of his protocols covered shadow figures that existed only in reflections, dead fathers who whispered names from morgue tables, or marks that transferred death's attention between the living like a contagious disease. Claire's hands were shaking as she pulled a worn notebook from her nightstand drawer. David Brennan's handwriting filled every page. Dates, names, addresses. A detailed record of his 16-year investigation into the phenomenon that had marked him. Marcus scanned the entries with growing horror. Dozens of first responders, paramedics, firefighters, emergency room nurses, all reporting similar experiences after specific calls. All dying exactly 16 years later. All trying desperately to pass the mark to someone else before their time ran out. But as Marcus read deeper into David's research, a pattern emerged that Claire either hadn't noticed or hadn't wanted to acknowledge. The responders who successfully transferred the mark all had one thing in common. They had lied to their replacement. They had manipulated. They had orchestrated situations where innocent people accepted death's attention without understanding what was being given to them. David's notes were filled with guilt about joining their ranks. Filled with apologies to a daughter who would have to watch her father become the kind of person who sacrificed strangers to save himself. Except David hadn't done that. Marcus flipped to the final entries. October 10th. David writing about his decision, about choosing a different path, about the real reason he had researched Marcus Thompson so carefully. Marcus wasn't chosen randomly. Marcus wasn't an innocent bystander being manipulated into accepting a curse. Marcus was already marked. Had been marked 16 years ago during his very first emergency call as a paramedic. The same call that had marked David Brennan. The memories crashed into Marcus with force that made him sit down hard on Claire's bed. His first day. August 27th, 16 years ago. The call to 1847 Ashwood Drive. The elderly man dead in the living room. The training officer who had let Marcus take lead on pronouncing the death. The moment Marcus had knelt beside the body and heard his name whispered by lips that shouldn't have been capable of speech. The warning he had dismissed as nerves and imagination, and the stress of his first encounter with death in the field. David Brennan had been the training officer that day. David had been the one who should have pronounced the death. David had stepped back deliberately and let the rookie paramedic take that position. David had transferred the mark to Marcus 16 years ago, without Marcus understanding what was happening. And David had spent 16 years living with the guilt of that choice, watching Marcus's career from a distance, waiting for October 16th to arrive for both of them. Claire's face showed that she knew, had known all along. Her tears weren't just grief for a dead father. They were guilt for being complicit in the lie that brought Marcus to this house. The phone call to the morgue. The desperate plea for help. All orchestrated to get Marcus here so Claire could explain the truth before their shared deadline arrived. Because October 16th wasn't just David's marked day, it was Marcus's too. They had both been marked during that first call 16 years ago. Both given the same expiration date. Both living on borrowed time that had finally run out. Marcus felt rage building beneath his shock. David could have warned him 16 years ago. Could have explained. Could have given Marcus the choice to refuse. Instead, David had saved himself by marking a rookie who trusted his training officer. Had created this nightmare through an act of cowardice disguised as mentorship. And now David was dead, and Marcus was trapped in a bedroom with the daughter of the man who had destroyed his life, and death's reflection watched them both with patient certainty. But Claire grabbed the notebook and showed Marcus the very last entry. Written yesterday morning. Hours before David died. The entry that changed everything. David explaining that he had discovered something the other marked responders didn't know. The mark wasn't a curse. It was an invitation. Death marked certain people because they had a choice to make. Accept the role of guide. Help others transition. Become the bridge between living and dying that emergency responders already were in physical terms. Or refuse. Fight. Try to transfer the mark through manipulation and lies. David had spent 16 years researching both paths. and he had made his choice. David's death at 11:47 hadn't been surrender. It had been acceptance. He had died willingly, consciously, peacefully. No struggle, no fear. Just understanding that his role was changing, that he was moving from responding to emergencies among the living to responding to emergencies among the dying. And his final act was bringing Marcus to this house not to transfer a curse, but to offer him the same choice. Accept or refuse, guide or fight, become what they were always meant to be, or spend the rest of their lives running from shadows that would never stop following. The figure in the reflection moved closer. Marcus could feel its presence now even without looking at the window, could sense its attention focused entirely on him, waiting for his decision. Waiting to see if Marcus Thompson would make the same choice David Brennan had made, or if he would do what so many marked responders had done before. Fight, manipulate, try to save himself by sacrificing someone else to the role he was refusing to accept. Claire spoke quietly. Her father had wanted Marcus to understand that death wasn't punishment, it was transformation. The marked responders who died in fear and pain were the ones who fought. The ones who went peacefully, like David, were the ones who accepted, who understood that their work didn't end when hearts stopped beating. It just changed form, changed focus, changed the kind of emergencies they responded to. Marcus looked at his hands. 16 years of saving lives. 16 years of responding to calls. 16 years of being the bridge between crisis and stability. And now he understood that every call had been preparation. Every life saved had been training. Every death witnessed had been education for a role that transcended the physical boundaries he thought defined his work. Marcus stood and faced the window. Not the reflection, not the shadow figure that waited with ancient patience, but his own eyes staring back at him through rain-streaked glass. He thought about every emergency call he had ever responded to, every person he had saved, every person he had lost, every moment balanced on the edge between life and death, where his decisions mattered more than protocols or equipment or medical knowledge. He had always felt something in those moments. A presence, a guidance, something beyond training that told him when to fight harder and when to let go. Now he understood what that presence was, not intuition, not experience, but the role he had been marked for 16 years ago. The role David Brennan had seen in him even as a rookie paramedic taking his first call. The role that had been waiting for Marcus to stop running and finally accept what he had always been meant to become. Marcus spoke to the reflection, to the shadow figure, to whatever force existed in the space between consciousness and void. He said he understood. He said he accepted. He said he was ready to expand his emergency response beyond the limitations of physical breath and beating hearts. Ready to guide those who were trapped in that terrible transition. Ready to be the voice that whispered names to paramedics who would one day make the same choice. Ready to become what David Brennan had become when his heart stopped at 11:47. The shadow figure in the reflection moved, not threatening, not approaching to claim or consume, but stepping back, making space, offering passage. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. Not pain, not fear, but release. Like he had been holding his breath for 16 years and finally remembered how to exhale. The mark wasn't being removed, it was being fulfilled, transformed from countdown to purpose. Claire was crying again, but differently now, not grief or fear, relief. Her father's plan had worked. Marcus had understood, had chosen acceptance over fighting, had broken the cycle of marked responders dying in terror because they refused to see that death wasn't an ending, but a transition to different work. She hugged Marcus with desperate gratitude, thanked him for giving her father's sacrifice meaning, for proving that David's research and guilt and final choice had saved at least one person from the fate of those who fought until the very end. Marcus asked Claire what happened now. She explained that her father's notes said the transformation took time, that Marcus would continue his work as a paramedic, would live his normal life, but he would also begin to sense the others, the ones trapped between worlds, the ones who needed guidance, the emergency calls that came from places medical equipment couldn't detect. And when his physical time ended, whenever that was, he would simply continue. Same work, different realm, same purpose, different patients. She also explained the real reason David had brought Marcus here tonight. Claire was marked too, not from being a first responder, but from being David's daughter. From growing up in a house where death's attention had been focused for 16 years. She had absorbed that mark through proximity and love, and she had the same choice Marcus just made. Accept or fight, guide or run. David's final gift to his daughter was making sure she saw what acceptance looked like. Making sure she understood that the mark wasn't a curse their family carried, but a calling. Marcus left 1847 Ashwood Drive as dawn broke over the city. The rain had stopped. October morning light turned the wet streets gold. He drove back to St. Catherine's Hospital and filed his report about the missing equipment bag. Someone had found it in the cafeteria. Simple explanation. Nothing unusual. He finished his paperwork and went home to sleep. But that night when he returned for his next shift, Marcus noticed something different. The hospital felt more crowded than before, not with living patients and medical staff, but with others. Shadows in doorways. Figures in empty rooms. People who had died but hadn't fully left. Some confused, some frightened, some waiting for someone to acknowledge them, someone to help them understand what came next, someone to respond to their emergency with the same calm professionalism Marcus brought to the living. Marcus began his new training that night, learning to respond to calls that came from silence instead of radios, learning to stabilize transitions instead of vital signs, learning to guide the dying with the same care he had always given the living. David Brennan visited him once, not as a shadow or reflection, but clear and present and at peace. He thanked Marcus, apologized for the 16 years of not knowing, explained that some marks took time to understand. Some callings required resistance before acceptance. Some gifts looked like curses until you finally saw their true shape. Years passed. Marcus continued both roles, paramedic to the living, guide to the dying. The work blended together until he stopped seeing them as separate. Every emergency call existed on a spectrum. Some people needed physical intervention. Some needed help crossing thresholds their loved ones couldn't see. All of them needed someone who understood that healing wasn't always about keeping hearts beating. Sometimes it was about making sure people didn't face the transition alone. Sometimes it was about being the voice that whispered names in the darkness and said you're not forgotten. You're not abandoned. Someone is here to help you find your way. Claire Brennan became a hospice nurse. She accepted her mark the same way Marcus had. Father and daughter working different aspects of the same calling. Different realms. Same purpose. The family legacy transformed from curse to compassion. Marcus Thompson worked as a paramedic until his body finally gave out at 73. Heart attack. Quick. Peaceful. He felt David Brennan's presence as his consciousness separated from flesh. Felt the guidance he had given so many others over the decades. Felt the transition that he had learned to navigate for people who were frightened and alone. And he understood finally that death had never been the enemy. Fear was. Fear of the unknown. Fear of abandonment. Fear of facing that final emergency without someone trained to respond. His last thought as Marcus Thompson, the paramedic, was gratitude. For David's choice. For Claire's acceptance. For 16 years of preparation that had seemed like ordinary work until he understood its true purpose. His first thought as Marcus Thompson, the guide, was simple. Who needs help? Where's the next emergency? Who is calling my name from the space between heartbeats where people get lost without someone to show them the way forward? In the end, perhaps the real miracle was fear. Not the fear that makes you run, but the fear that makes you stop, makes you listen, makes you understand that some calls can't be refused, some marks can't be removed. Some purposes are written in the moment you first respond to an emergency and realize you were born for this work. Born to stand at the edge between worlds and say calmly, professionally, with absolute certainty, I'm here. You're not alone. Let me help you through this. What do you think happens when we stop fighting the roles we're meant to play? Share your thoughts below. In the end, perhaps the real miracle was fear.